Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and today we are going to talk about Apple's no good, very bad week because, quite frankly, 3 stories have broken that really affect them. So heads up, Mac users, developers, and shareholders, I'm looking to all of you, and we're going to start with the shareholders because money. Now, this is according to the AFP, but Apple's shares went tumbling yesterday on word of a steep drop in sales of iPhones, which obviously is at the core of their money-making engine. Apple's profits fell 7% to $12.7 billion, basically in their recently ended quarter, and this is according to Apple's own earnings release. Now, iPhone sales, which are the major income driver for Apple, slid 20% from a year ago, which obviously unsettled investors. The company's share price nosedived more than 4% in after-hour trading, and according to analyst Patrick Moorhead of More Insights and Strategy, and I quote, "iPhone is the cash cow and the driver of pretty much every add-on service Apple has out there. Everything is tied to that," which makes sense. You're going to go get iTunes and everything else. Most of it is mobile, App Store for apps, you name it. So that's obviously a huge problem. But I don't know what Apple necessarily expected during a pandemic. With a ton of people out of jobs or sick or worried about the economic future in a down economy here in the United States and elsewhere in the world thanks to the pandemic, why on earth would you buy or upgrade a rather expensive phone to another expensive phone? You're going to save that cash. So I think this makes sense. And hopefully after all of this ends, Apple will rebound for you investors. Heads up, you took it on the chin this week. Moving on, let's talk about developers. You're up next because app developers, according to the Washington Post, are defying Apple in record numbers, according to a new coalition of companies aimed at breaking Apple's grip over its mobile software and the way it's actually governing the App Store. Now, the Coalition for App Fairness was launched last month, and it counts members such as the massive video game developer Epic, as well as Match Group, which is Match.com, and I think a whole slew of dating apps as well, music streaming giant Spotify, and they say that the original 13 core companies that founded this have grown to 40, and they have over 400 requests to join the coalition. Now, this growing membership of the coalition represents a remarkable shift in thinking as companies and individual developers take the risky step of actually speaking out against the way Apple is operating, and obviously they're wanting change. Many developers and smaller companies are very dependent on Apple for essentially their revenue and their livelihood, but don't have the resources to cope if Apple removes their app or prohibits them from updating it. Some of Apple's peers have also stepped up to advocate changes in the App Store, such as Microsoft, who earlier this month actually expressed support for the coalition when it announced new guidelines for the Microsoft Store, which is based on the coalition's recommendations. Facebook also basically talked about Apple because they say that it's making it difficult for companies to advertise in iPhone and iPad apps, and that obviously comes on the heels of some big tech scrutiny by the US government, because earlier this month, the House Judiciary Committee released a scathing 450-page report that criticized Apple and other big tech companies for allegedly using their power to quash competition and stifle innovation for their financial gain. A section of the report focused on the practices that Apple employs in its App Store, where it obviously strictly controls what software can be installed on Apple devices and how it can be installed. And basically, they're also collecting 30% fees from many developers who make the software for the App Store that runs on iOS, which is the iPad iPhone operating system. Apple has obviously held tight control over their ecosystems in the past. I can remember if you look at, let's say, a PC versus a Mac, why there's 800 choices in hardware for a PC and like 3 for Mac. They've always controlled their ecosystem, but that may actually be changing. So we may see basically an app store for iPhone and iPad that looks a little bit more like Google's Android Play Store in that sense. We'll see where that goes, but that's obviously a huge thing. And finally, I'm talking to you, Mac users, whether it's a desktop, a MacBook Pro, whatever it is. If you're running the Mac operating system, soon to be Big Sur, basically, you could be downloading malicious apps. And here's what's going on. And this is coming from a few different sources, but researchers have found repeated successful attempts by criminals to bypass Apple's app notarization, which is a security check for apps outside of the Mac App Store. At least 6 malware-containing apps have successfully bypassed this system in a recent wave. Researchers from a group called Intego, which is a security firm that basically looks at Apple products, that's their focus, have found at least 2 waves of malicious apps that bypass Apple's app notarization process. Now, Apple launched this earlier this year as an additional check for Mac apps outside of the App Store. It's an automated scanning process, not to be confused with their app review for that store, that basically notarizes or signs off on safe apps. Such apps then basically pass through the Apple gatekeeper check before they get downloaded. And so essentially, Apple is saying, hey, this malicious app, go download it, MacBook user, you're good. Now, in this way, by virtue of this, Apple is extending trust, which means users are then trusting the app because Apple is signing off on it if they're notarizing it. Here we go. However, Intego recently found multiple malicious apps that have bypassed the app notarization, and apparently, according to them, rather easily. At first, in late August 2020, they disclosed dozens of notarized apps containing a malware that relates to the OS/X/Bundler and OS/Slayer families of malware, meaning these are specifically written for OS X, the Mac operating system, and they are malware. Then recently, they shared details about another wave of malicious notarized apps. This time, these Mac apps contain malware from the OS X Mac Offers. It's also known as Mac's Offer Deal family as well. And so they explained in their release on their blog post that they found 6 different apps that initially had a 0% detection rate on virus total. And then even later, the apps had a very low detection rate there, as well as obviously bypassing Mac's security check. And I will say this till I am blue in the face. If you run a MacBook, you need a virus scanner. You are not free from infection. There has been this complete utter misnomer and straight up lie, I think, from Apple because their marketing basically says, well, if you have a Mac, you're never going to get infected. You remember the old I'm a Mac and I'm a PC commercials with Justin Long, and I cannot remember the other guy, but he's a comedian. They were stating it back then, and it is not true now, and it's not true then. Get yourself a good antivirus. Is beyond important, but that is your Mac news of the week, or I'm sorry, your Apple news, well, Mac news too, but your Apple news of the week. That's a very serious issue, and I'm sure if you're an investor, a developer, or a MacBook user, you've been affected and you may not know it. So there you go. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe and stay online. Thanks, everyone.